Hey friends, welcome to the Entrusted to Lead podcast. I'm your host, Danita Cummins, and on today's episode, we're going to talk a little bit about emotional intelligence. So get ready to dig in, ask some hard questions, uncover some of those things that keep us from being the best version of us. Grab your cup of coffee or your favorite beverage of choice, and let's get started. Doing things alone is entirely overrated. We all need a community to thrive. And that's why I'm part of an online community of writers and speakers, podcasters, and entrepreneurs called Creatives. And I love it. In the years since I joined this community, I've launched new ideas, and I finally executed the dreams that sat on the shelf for years. Seriously. And I was able to do this because of the outstanding group of mentors, exceptional training, and encouraging mastermind groups with my new friends who did and continue to give me invaluable feedback. Oh, and not to mention all the fun, because we have had lots and lots of fun. Have you ever said, I want to write a book? Or do you want to use your voice for the exciting world of podcasting? If so, Called Creatives is your best resource for up-to-the-minute industry training, expert advice, live coaching, and peer support like no other. Best-selling authors and speakers Allie Worthington and Lisa Whittle lead this community with a no-competition mission, and it shows. So join my friends and I in the Called Creative community. Head to my show notes, danitacummins.com/podcast, and click the link to get all the details to join. I promise you won't regret it. I look forward to seeing you in the community and watching you grow. Have you ever been in a situation at work or home where in the heat of the moment you got frustrated or overwhelmed and you said or did something that you later regret? Yeah, me too. As leaders, we talk a lot about culture in our organizations, but sometimes we don't really talk about our emotional intelligence and the emotional culture that affects our organizations. Experts tell us that we share or typically refer to a cognitive culture, which is when we share intellectual values, norms, assumptions, and those guide the group and help us to thrive. It sets the tone for how we behave. And as I've said before, culture is like that iceberg in your office. You see the top things like actions or mission or vision, how we say we act or believe or what we value. But then the truth is somewhere under the surface. It's those things that are driving our culture. They're under the waterline, and they can be dangerous if left unattended. But how does emotional culture work? And why is it so important in both our lives and our organizations? I often say to my family and to different people that I'm coaching that emotions and thoughts are like clouds. They come and they go. A good friend showed me that every feeling is valid and it deserves its own seat at the proverbial table. But when we grow up, sometimes we're not taught how to manage our emotions effectively. Emotions are a resource, like time or money. They are one of our most greatest assets. And as leaders, we have to grow to learn how to understand and decipher them. And then we have to develop the skills to be able to manage the emotions of others. And that is a concept called emotional intelligence. Early in my leadership journey, I learned that EQ, or emotional intelligence, was more important than our IQ. Because without emotional intelligence, it doesn't matter how smart you are. If you can't relate to people, then you're never going to be an effective leader, right? Never. And leadership starts with you, friend. And one of the largest parts that make up your personality and how you relate to others is your emotions. You are uniquely designed. You are the only one of you. So when you take the time to understand your own personal emotions and feelings, and then you learn how to manage them, that is essential for your personal development, your health, your family, and your teams. Without first understanding your emotions, you'll never be able to help others or your organizations grow. You just won't. When we decide to focus on our emotions, we have to ask a few questions. So we're going to walk through a little bit of what I would say, like a little bit of a training session today. I'm going to take you through a couple of tips that I have that I learned over the years to help me understand my emotional intelligence, be a little bit more self-aware about how I feel and why I'm feeling the way that I am. So the first question you ask yourself, it's really easy. You just say, how does this make me feel? Right? That sounds pretty easy. I mean, it's not complicated, but it's a little bit harder to do if we're honest. In a recent podcast, I just had a great conversation the other day with an author and a mindset coach, Byron Morrison, and his show will come out later this year. But we talked about why our mindset is our most important asset. So definitely look for that show. But during the conversation, he shared his experiences, and now he coaches CEOs and leaders, and he helps them overcome those mental blocks that keep them from moving forward. So it was a great conversation. But we talk about these things like expectations and fears. Those are real things, right? They're real things. And so the question is, when you ask yourself, how do I feel? That's really the starting block to help you unwrap those emotions. Okay. And then once you ask yourself that question, how do I feel? Then the next question should invariably be, why do I feel this way? Right. And man, I wish I could tell you that's like super easy. That's a super easy question to ask yourself. It's not. Okay. It's not. I promise. It's not. It takes a lot of self-awareness to really dig into that. Like, why do I feel like this? But you have a responsibility to lead yourself and others well, right? We talk about that all the time on the podcast. So it's really important for you to take the time to investigate, what about this situation is making me feel frustrated or angry or irritated or overwhelmed or even happy? And why do I feel like this? Right? It takes time to unwrap it. You're not going to get all the answers today. But that discovery process, that self-awareness process is essential for growth. Recently, I was having a conversation with someone and they're struggling with someone else's behavior, right? And I said to her, I said, you know what? You can't control anybody else in the world. Nobody, ever. You can only control your response. That's it. And you're the only one of you. And you're going to be with you for a really long time. So sometimes we just take our feelings and we kind of stuff, we keep moving forward and we say, it's okay. But I would encourage you, especially if you're a leader, you're in a position of like helping other people navigate hard spaces. When you come up against something at work or you get irritated or frustrated or sad or whatever, you should take the time to ask yourself, how do I feel? And why do I feel the way that I feel? Right? It's really, really important. I would say that we talk a lot about growth in leadership, having a growth mindset, doing all of these things. But I kind of equate it to gardening. I don't know where you're at and when you're listening to this podcast, but for me, spring is nearing. And if you're like me, you might enjoy the days when sun shines and you get a chance to get away from the screen or not surrounded by endless, continuous meetings with no break. And you get to go outside and possibly experience something new. But for years, I've dreamed every spring for years. I always dream of having this beautiful garden filled with all these overflowing vines of flowers and shrubs and this massive, amazing garden filled with vegetables. I love tomatoes. Other than strawberries, there's nothing that I love more than a freshly grown tomato. I know some of you might not like them. That's okay. And it's even better when it comes straight from my garden. My dad used to grow them, and he was really good at growing tomatoes. And I've tried over the years. Most of the time, my plants are wilted and brown and not growing, probably because I don't go outside and water them enough, if we're being honest. But when that happens, I know that I should look at the soil and see what's happening, right? I at least know that much. I know that there's some kind of discovery process that I need to go through in order to make the tomatoes better, to get better results. So I got to test the soil. I got to see what's going on. And then I can make some changes, right? Add nutrients or whatever I need to do. I think self-awareness is the same thing. You have to go on a discovery journey. There's an article in the Harvard Business Review called Managing Your Emotional Culture. And this article explains that most leaders focus on how employees think and behave, but feelings matter just as much. So I'll drop a link in the show notes for you. You can definitely check that out if you're interested and share your comments. But in one company, the article explained that at the end of every day, employees were asked to press a button to identify how they felt when they were leaving the office. They could press a smiley face if they were happy or a frowny face if they were sad. I mean, imagine that. Something that we think is probably pretty simplistic, but it's a great way to measure our productivity at work. But I think the article and the company make a great point because the company uses the data to understand what motivates employees, to learn what makes them feel like they belong, and it brings excitement to work. And so today, I would just encourage you to spend a little bit of time, whenever that is, throughout your day or week, and just jot it down. If you're working through something and you get frustrated, or you find at the end of a day when you're leaving the office that you just feel defeated or overwhelmed or run down, then I think you owe it to yourself and to your team to really ask yourself, why? How do I feel? And why do I feel the way that I feel? So when we look and consider our emotional intelligence, our own personal emotional love tank, if we will, it's important to know how you feel and why you feel that way. You can't bring things to the office or to the organization or your team. You can't offer the emotional, encouragement and all those things to your family if you're empty at the end of a really long day. And it really does matter. How many times have we worked with a boss or a team member who doesn't like their job, isn't happy there, doesn't want to be there? We talk a lot about that on the podcast too, right? Different stories of trying to help people navigate through that as a leader. But I do truly believe that leadership starts with you, and you have a responsibility to lead yourself and others well. And so understanding your emotional intelligence and understanding the emotional culture of your work center is a critical piece of helping you lead yourself and others well. I would love to have you share your comments or thoughts. Would love to have you come on the show. If that's something that you would like to do, you're welcome to go to dennydacummins.com/podcast and check that out. There's a guest form. Happy for you to fill that out. Would love to have a conversation. There's also some great episodes coming up over the next couple of months. So I encourage you to just tune in to those shows. We're going to be talking with some of my favorite military friends, again, some authors with some great books that are coming out this summer. So I'm just excited to continue to have this leadership conversation with you. If you would like to leave a comment or something, a review on Spotify or iHeartRadio or Apple, wherever you listen to this message, I would love to have your thoughts and encouragement. It means a lot to me. So just keep showing up every single day, even when it's hard, friend, because you matter. I hope you have an amazing day. I'll see you later. Bye. Thanks for listening to the Entrusted to Lead podcast. This podcast was brought to you by our amazing producers at Wildfire Creative Company. So if you enjoyed today's episode, please hop over to iTunes or Spotify, subscribe, rate it, and leave a review. It's very much appreciated. And make sure you come back. We'll talk more about the essence and elements of leadership on the first and third Thursday of every month. If you enjoyed today's show, you can head over to dennydacummins.com/podcast and gain access to additional free resources. But make sure you subscribe to our newsletter so you can stay up to date on the latest shows. Have an amazing day. Talk to you soon.